Alrighty, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I do want to go ahead and be mindful of everyone's time and go ahead and start. But like I said, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Shira Zeller. I'm the graduate coordinator here for graduate admissions at FIU. And thank you for coming for our session. I know I keep saying that, but I'm just very excited for everyone to be here. Just a little history of how we even got started with our sessions. So ever since the pandemic started, we had to switch everything to be digital and remote. So that's how we started our information sessions essentially. And we've been having general information sessions such as graduate funding, so on and so forth. And one feedback we actually received from students throughout the summer was that, hey, we want to hear from specific departments. We want to know all the information. And that's kind of how our takeover sessions were born and created. So also on the call today, we do have my colleagues. We have Nanette Rojas, who is the Assistant Director for Graduate Admissions, and then we also have Albert Hoyt, who is the Associate Director. So we have our small team over here. We're small but mighty, as I always like to joke. And today for our takeover session, we are joined by the History Department. And we are here with Dr. Otovo and all of her colleagues, which is amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the floor to the History Department.
Thank you so much, Shira, and good morning to everyone. So first of all, let me thank your entire team for putting together this event. I think this is a great idea and a wonderful way, even beyond the pandemic, for us to get a chance to communicate with prospective students or anyone who's just interested in graduate study in history. We are very excited to get to share a little bit with you today. We don't want to prolong the presentation part too much because we're really happy to answer questions and to talk about your interests and answer any questions that you have about our department and what it's like to be a graduate student or to pursue history at the graduate level. I will really quickly introduce my colleagues, and then I'm going to give them a chance in a moment to speak a little bit about their own work and research interests and their work with graduate students, just in order that they appear on my screen. Dr. Jessica Adler, who was a US historian, a modern US historian in our department. Dr. Hillary Jones, in my feed is next to her, who is a historian of post-colonial and sorry, well, she's a historian of really 19th century West African history, particularly Senegal, but she does do some teaching in post-colonial Africa as well. Also, a little bit further down my line is Dr. Julio Capo, who is let's say a transnational Americanist, a US historian in our department and an alum of FIU, as well as deputy director of the Wilsonian Public History Lab. And so he'll get a chance to talk to us a little bit about public history and about that institute that's closely linked to our department as well. And finally, Johnny Irizarry Rojas, who is president of DOGSA, our beloved DOGSA, which is the Department of History's Graduate Student Association. So those are the representatives of the History Department here with us today, and happy to talk to you about what we do and what you can learn about our department. I'm going to repeat something that Shira said a moment ago, which I just loved. She said her team is small and mighty, small but mighty. And I would say, I think the same thing about the history department. We may not be the largest department on campus, but our department really is a research and teaching force. So I think we have a pretty impressive department in terms of the depth of the research produced by our faculty, as well as our graduate students, and the ability to really teach from kind of pre-modern to what we might call history of the present, really thinking about big questions, as well as rooting those in geographies across the world. So we have a small but mighty department. I had in my notes that we're a close-knit department and a very large and diverse university. So I want to share my screen a bit, and I'm just going to talk very briefly before I hand the floor over to my colleagues. let me attempt to share my screen here. And let's see if this works. Okay. I think I'm showing the screen and my slideshow. Okay, finally. So first of all, obviously, I repeated I welcome. I just want to say a few words about FIU for those who might be less familiar, and then about the department and our programs at the graduate level. So first of all, I want to say that the Department of History, as I said, really has a committed focus on historical research. We are a research department, I think, first and foremost. Also a department that very much embraces, in layman terms, what you might call applied history, or that is history beyond the academy, history in public settings or public facing history. I think we really embrace the traditional methods of historical inquiry. So those methods and questions that have been fundamental to the discipline for many decades, while also very much embracing or promoting up-to-date innovative questions and approaches. So a nice mix of both the traditional and the kind of cutting edge. As I said about our chronology, we are a department that certainly teaches from the pre-modern period to the contemporary period. I think I could say across the board, we are interested in understanding history to understand the context and the issues of the past, but also helping us frame the context of our present. We're a department that's very much transnational and comparative. In a moment, you'll see that our Atlantic history, or excuse me, our PhD program, in fact, has a focus on Atlantic history. So the kind of transnational, these questions that are beyond just one nation state are very close to our hearts in this department. And as I mentioned, we are a department in a large, diverse, sunny, beautiful campus in Miami. So we are, history is part of, obviously our department is part of the School of International and Public Affairs at Florida International University. For those who are less familiar, again, a large public university, an urban university in Miami. We have students, obviously many local students, many from South Florida. You can't really travel across South Florida at all without encountering people who have a close connection. So not just a connection, but a close connection to Florida International University. We really are an important part of our regional community here. But Florida International University also has students from across the world. So we're really a nice mix of local and being very rooted in our community, as well as being an educational destination for students from basically every country around the world. So in terms of what we offer in history, we have two graduate programs, the PhD in Atlantic History, for those who aspire to kind of the toughest possible research challenge in history, and those who are looking for a terminal degree, so the PhD, to produce scholarship in the field of history. And we have an MA in history as well that offers a couple of options. Both are really research intensive. I didn't mean to say these as if they're mutually exclusive, but one of our MAs has, we'd say probably a little bit more of a research focus, than the other, which is also a research degree, but the public history program, which Dr. Capot will discuss for us in just a moment here, is another option for students who are interested again in the public facing professions of the discipline. So those who are interested in working in institutions or for foundations to produce history with the public and for public facing audiences. I will also mention that our MA in history has a fully online option. So that's a new part of our curriculum. Okay. So just to kind of recap there, and I have some lovely images of our real students, not stock photos, our real students who are both in our Atlantic History doctorate and in the MA in history. Structurally, I don't want to talk too much about the structure. I'll leave that for the question and answer so I don't get too boring down into the details. But the curriculum for both degrees, as I said, is research intensive, requires in-depth knowledge of historical methods. The PhD is another level of intensity and depth beyond the MA. The PhD, of course, requires that students produce an original piece of research as their capstone, as kind of the hallmark of the doctorate in the form of a dissertation based on original research questions and based on the appropriate kind of sources that match those. Quickly, I'll say a little bit about our student body. Our PhD in history mainly consists of students pursuing the degree full-time. PhDs are that kind of degree that are really best pursued for those who can devote all of their attention to it. However, we do have part-time students in our PhD program who work very hard on that balance between trying to complete a doctorate while also managing their careers. And many of these students are interested in careers after the doctorate in education and a university setting, but also, as I said, in fields of public history as well, and government service and kind of policy research. We have a lot of destinations, publishing destinations that students go on to beyond the PhD. And at the MA level, as you could guess, we have a lot of students who are, our MA students tend to be part-time students. So that is students who have their careers and have chosen to go back to school, many of whom are teachers themselves, and many are preparing for public history professions after the degree. And with our new fully online option, I think we'll have even a broader range of interests that bring people to the MA in history. So beyond that, I didn't want to do too much talking and take up too much of our time here before I pass along to our my colleagues to give us a little bit more of the personal introduction to who they are and what they do and what students may expect in working with them. So let me stop here and go in the same order and ask Dr. Adler if she could just give us a few brief comments about her own work and how she works with graduate students. And I'm going to continue to share my screen if I could mute myself, just because I have some lovely images of FIU to share.
Thanks, Dr. Otovo, and welcome to the prospective students. Thank you for hosting us, Shira and your team. So as Dr. Otovo said, you have a few of us here today, so each of us is going to give you just a brief overview of our own work, maybe in the context of the department. So my research is on US health policy and healthcare, and my first book and ongoing work actually focus on healthcare and health programs for US military veterans. But most generally, I examine government involvement in health in the United States. And that broad focus helps to explain the book that I'm currently working on, which is about healthcare in US prisons, mainly in the 20th century. So at FIU, I teach general modern US history, and I also teach classes that are focused on history of medicine and history of prisons and punishment. In terms of history of medicine, I want to mention that there are a few of us in the department who focus on that area. It's become sort of an area of strength. We have Dr. Royals, Dr. Moss, Dr. Otovo, and I'm sure I'm leaving out others that maybe others can add. But if that's an area of interest for anyone, we do have a critical mass that is here to support you. So generally, I work with graduate students whose dissertations or theses are on anything having to do with anything from social movements to bureaucracy and policy. So most of us are very open-minded in terms of, we have our specific areas of research, but our interests span widely, even beyond the geography area that might be listed next to us on the website. And so I encourage you all to be open-minded about who you approach for advice about the program and who you approach for possible guidance on your research, because each of us has worked on dissertation committees that seem somewhat remote from our own research, but we learn from that, and we feel that we can bring our strengths to areas that might at first seem outside of our research. So be open-minded as you explore who you might want to work with, and who might want to work with you. So I want to also mention that I'm one of multiple faculty in the department who have a joint appointment or who have an affiliation with an outside unit. So my second area of focus is public health. So in addition to teaching in history, I teach in the College of Public Health, and I work with graduate students there. Members of our department, like Dr. Mike Bustamante, also a graduate committee member, Dr. Moss, Dr. Friedman, Dr. Udibe, Dr. Jones, others too, are not only expert historians, but we have affiliations with other university units, and that can help expose our graduate students to new ways of thinking and perhaps even new opportunities. And I'm going to let Dr. Capot speak more about the wonderful resources that him and Dr. Friedman are bringing to our department, along with Dr. Royals, in the form of massive grants that, again, Dr. Capot will talk more about. But while I'm talking about the department more generally and this idea of funding and grants, I want to mention our strength that Dr. Otovo touched on in public history. This is another area that Dr. Capot, of course, as deputy director, is going to touch on. But I just want to say, because each of us has our own individual involvement in that initiative. That's what makes it a strength. Multiple faculty members are interested in public history work and have gotten funding to undertake it. So some of that sort of more public facing or outward facing work has to do with enhancing training for graduate students so that it's more diverse and not strictly focused on academia, so that each of us as faculty members can be open-minded to training students for careers that might be outside of the academy. Dr. Lee Partito and another faculty member and I had a grant a number of years ago from the National Endowment for the Humanities that was intended to diversify our graduate curriculum. And recently, Dr. Otovo got funding from the American Historical Association for this spring for some of us to sort of be involved in an AHA effort that is focused on history departments diversifying training for students. And so just to say that we are among the I think it's a dozen or so departments on that AHA grant. I'm not sure that that's the exact number, but something like that, that we're part of this larger movement within the field to really try to think open-mindedly about what graduate training is for students and what it should consist of. So in addition to those grants that focus on graduate training, our department also, of course, pursues grants that have to do with funding community-based programs. So Dr. Lee Partito and Dr. Royals, again, have led multiple projects involving Miami area organizations like museums, local governments, and they have very successfully involved graduate students in those efforts that enable graduate students to get training in digitizing historical materials or in sort of serving as program administrators. I had a National Endowment for the Humanities grant a couple of years ago that was a community-based discussion group for military veterans, and one of our master's students was the program administrator for that. And so in that way, we're trying to seek funding and opportunities that involve our graduate students and that create opportunities for them. And like I said, Dr. Capot, I'm sure will have more to say about that because he's been especially successful and active in that respect. Now, just finally, I'll close by just saying that the most immediate way that we faculty members, of course, work with graduate students is on dissertation committees, but also, of course, in the classroom. In that capacity, you know, I think I can speak for most of us when I say that we work hard to create classes that allow you to develop historical literacy, but that also, like a broad historical literacy, but that also enable us to give you feedback on research areas that you're really trying to develop an expertise in. And that's the kind of balance of graduate training, is to develop a broad area, a broad knowledge of your major field, but also develop core expertise in subfields. And so our classes sort of work you towards that goal. And like Dr. Otovo said, we can talk more about curriculum and class structures if you're interested in that. And just to point out that a number of us are also interested not only in helping you develop the skills to write good history, but also to write for audiences that might not be academic. So writing for public audiences. So some of us have incorporated that sort of work into our classes. For example, how to write an op-ed, et cetera. So I welcome questions. We welcome questions about any of these things. And I'm going to turn it over to, is it Dr. Jones next on your screen, Dr. Otovo? Okay, so here we go with Dr. Jones. And thanks again for your time, everybody.
Hello, everyone. And so good to be here with you all this morning. Thank you to Shira and your team for pulling us all together. Dr. Adler said everything so perfectly, and so thoroughly, I should say, so thoroughly, that I'll be a bit brief, but want to give you a sense of the work that I do, and then the synergies with the department, and the kinds of opportunities we have for interdisciplinary work in the history department at FIU. So my research specialty is Africa. And like many people, I was trained to do research and teaching about Africa kind of almost globally, right? We learn how to teach many, many different time periods. So as Dr. Otovo started to say, my real training is in 19th century pre-colonial African history. But one of the things that I've learned is that you have to be nimble in what you do. And I've also discovered ways in which teaching more contemporary time periods also allows for conversations about the colonial past, for example. So right now I'm teaching a course for graduate students on the history of post-colonial Africa, Africa since 1960. But my own research focuses primarily on French West Africa, specifically the country of Senegal. And my interests have generally focused on the history, the formations, the development of racial identities in African port towns and in colonial capitals. And so that is to say that the work that I've done in historical research has focused in looking at how race, class, gender, nationality intersected with the development of what we might call sort of modern African nations. And my first book, The Métis of Senegal, Urban Life and Politics in French West Africa, dealt with this very issue by looking at kind of microhistories of a 19th century port town and the role of people of mixed racial ancestry in those port towns. My interests are, even more broadly speaking, are about the social history of Africa, about comparative histories of slavery and histories of the Atlantic slave trade. And that has kind of allowed me in my sort of more recent time period to branch out into new areas of research on the French Atlantic, on the transatlantic slave trade, from the perspective of West Africa, and also histories of the French-speaking and Francophone African diaspora. I've published on other works on Protestant communities and the making of 19th century Senegal, a country that's predominantly Muslim and influenced by French Roman Catholic missionaries. And I'm most recently working on a new book project that's about the long history of engagement and interaction between the French Caribbean and Senegal, and about the role that people from the French Antilles played, the French Antilles and also Haiti played in making modern Senegal. So that's a little bit about my particular research interests. I do want to say here that one of the exciting things for me about our history department at FIU is that we do different kinds of research, but we find certain synergies with one another. I was just teaching an undergraduate course, and the students said, well, in Dr. Peterson's class, we learned about Algeria. And, we were talking about, it's a course called Blacks in Paris. So we were talking about the African-American experience in Paris, but they were making those connections. And I think a lot of that translates into the graduate classroom. Graduate students who have funding, especially if they're working at the PhD level, may work with us in the classroom, which is really valuable experience, both for kind of learning what one might do in the future, but also for absorbing information that maybe you would not necessarily follow in a particular course of study, for example. At FIU, I have a joint appointment in the history department and in African and African diaspora studies. So as a result, one of the things that I do is to work with students who have interests in both of those areas. And in the case of AADS, who are pursuing a kind of interdisciplinary program, but want historical training. And for history students who are pursuing the discipline of history, but want to get some kind of interdisciplinary perspective. So a lot of my courses bring in literature, bring in anthropology, religious studies kinds of fields, women and gender studies fields. And so I think, as a department, we also have those kinds of interdisciplinary interests and can go in between different kinds of ways of knowing about the past, which I think gets to Dr. Otovo's point that we are both traditionalists in the sense that we work with documents or the sorts of materials that historians work with, but we are also forward looking at the ways in which we can interpret the past and think about the ways in which the past informs questions that we have today. So lastly, I will just add here that as I said, many of my courses cross over this line between history and African diaspora studies. I've also been able to work with other professors in the history department to develop grant projects that engage local community actors. So for example, Dr. Lee Partido and I were co-investigators on a grant for the historic Hampton House, which is one of the historic centers of, really segregated Miami. It was a hotel that was part of that landscape of segregated Miami for Black Americans. But, today is sort of a cultural center and a place in which we developed in this particular grant the Unity Boulevard film series. So we did series of film showings, and I had a graduate student who both worked with me on it, and then graduate students who were part of the events that we had at the historic Hampton House. So that's one of the highlights that I thought I would mention. And so I think I'll leave it there. If you have questions, I'd be glad to talk more about anything that I've brought up today. Thank you. Dr. Capo next.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Yes. I put up the Hampton House picture as you were speaking. So the left side is actually from the Hampton House event when there was the grand opening of the exhibit that the students curated. Of course, the Hampton House is the location of a Netflix movie right now. And so I haven't seen it yet, but I can't wait to kind of dramatize the types of events that the historic Hampton House has taken place in, and that our students are able to help memorialize in the exhibit that now stands on their property. So,
It's called
Dr.
One of the
Capo?
Days of Honey.
Directed it. Regina King directed it. It's getting a lot of Oscar buzz. It's really exciting. One Night in Miami. If you haven't seen it, definitely watch it. Hi, everyone. My name is Julio Capo, and I'm a transnational historian. And I'm changing a little some of the things that I was going to say, in large part responding to all the great things that my colleagues said to kind of build on these ideas. But I wrote a book called Welcome to Fairyland, about Miami's queer history from the 1890s to 1940s. And I've curated a few exhibitions for museums, both physical exhibitions and digital format. And I'm a former journalist. So I'm finishing a new exhibition now on the global history of HIV and AIDS, and a new book on Miami's LGBTQ history from the 1940s to the present. Generally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about my teaching. I teach courses on 19th and 20th century US history, but as Dr. Otovo said, many of us are also transnational historians. So I also think about very deeply the connections of the United States' history to Latin America and the Caribbean. So that is, my research and archives come out of the United States, and also places like Cuba, the Bahamas, Haiti, and many others. So like, I was thinking about an example. How do we understand the influx of Haitian, and I'm currently writing about this for a chapter, so it's very much on my mind. How do we understand the influx of Haitian immigration to the United States in this moment in the late 1970s without understanding the kind of push forces, right? So what's happening in Haiti during this period to kind of facilitate this? That is, immigration to one place, of course, is emigration from another place. And as I was doing this research, one of the things that kind of happened as I was conducting this research is to also learn that the Bahamas revokes Haitian working permits in the late 1970s for Haitians, right? Which helps push them to the United States. That is, all of these things are interconnected, and that we can't understand these histories in these kind of narrow or nation state specific ways, because life just doesn't look that way, especially for transnational movements and people and immigrants, right, are transnational subjects by definition. So this is really what we think about when we talk about transnational history. I can talk about that forever, but I would encourage you to not let me. But I want to spend more time than talking about public history and the many opportunities you have available to you here at FIU. I can't stress this enough. This is a really, really most exciting time for public history at FIU, in our department, and really at a key time in national and international politics. That is, the kind of work you can do here is transformative and so incredibly important and necessary. And we're asking really important questions, and our students are doing really incredible work, and there's an opportunity to join that conversation. We need people to join this conversation. So in addition to having many opportunities, one of the things I want to stress about our public history program is that you can really tailor aspects of this program to your strengths, your interests, and your expertise. And really through our guidance and our consultation, we are going to help you think about what the job market looks like today. We are a really research intensive department, as Dr. Otova and my other colleagues noted. Our faculty publishes a lot. That means we publish a lot of books, we do a lot of academic articles, chapters, and essays, but we are also public-facing scholars. Our department is really strong in presenting our research to audiences outside of the academy as well. So you'll see many of us write regularly for mainstream presses, from the New York Times to the Washington Post to the Sun Sentinel locally, Miami Herald, Time Magazine, in Nuevo Dia. I'm thinking about Johnny here, and several others, right? And I should note, this is not just, as I kind of singled out Johnny, who's here with us, this is not just our faculty, it's our students too. That is, you'll see some of our graduate students do this kind of really important work. We train them to do this important work. Some appear regularly as faculty appear regularly as talking heads on local and national media, on podcasts, documentaries. Many curate exhibitions. We do work with museums, as Dr. Jones noted earlier, with Historic Hampton House and preservationist work. We care very deeply about this. So we are all committed to the idea that the research we produce doesn't just belong to us in some kind of ivory tower, but that is meant to be shared, processed, and understood by multiple publics, even those who may not like aspects of that history. History is not always palatable to some people, right? But it remains there, right, for us to engage and acknowledge. and to be understood by a number of different publics. History is, among many, many other things, also a kind of position to our present. And what I mean by that is that the questions we ask, the archives we use, the knowledge we deem worthy of attention are also very much a reflection of our present. And these are the kinds of questions that we dig really deep in our public history courses and our courses more generally in our department. So I won't talk too much about the details of the public history program, that is the requirements and these kinds of things, although I'm happy to, of course, answer any questions. But to very briefly review what Dr. Otovo noted, we have an MA track in public history, wherein you take courses in public history as well as other general history and research courses in our department. Also, you can take courses. We care very deeply about interdisciplinarity outside of the department within consultation with us. And also must complete, as part of this public history track, 2 semester-long internships at a local organization, community partner, or institution. This can range from a museum to an archive, a library, or even a nonprofit. We help guide you and pair you with the right place based on your background and interests. And I'll give just a few brief examples in just a minute. Like several of my colleagues have noted, I'm also a joint hire with the history department. I am the deputy director of the new Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab. I'll tell you what we are, WPHL for short. One of the things that we do is we are the humanities hub for the university, particularly engaged with public facing work. So how do we, think about doing work beyond the walls of the university? How do we leverage our resources as a university in service to our community? What does it mean to have the kind of privilege of being at a university and saying, but the knowledge that exists outside our walls is just as important, if not more important, and how do we use our resources as a university in service to this knowledge? And how do we collaborate and work and support that existing knowledge? In some ways, how do we decolonize, knowledge production more generally? That is what we do at the WPHL, which works very closely, as you will note, with the history department, and particularly with the public history program. We have 3 museums at FIU. That is the Frost Art Museum on campus, the Wolfsonian FIU on South Beach, and the Jewish Museum of Florida, also on South Beach. We regularly partner with them, of course, and we regularly partner with dozens of other local institutions. We have recently, this is really exciting news and why I say it's such an important time, and I think really great time to do this kind of work at FIU and in our department. We have recently secured at the WPHL close to $6 million worth of grants through a number of different projects, and it's a kind of complicated process to go through each one. But very, very briefly, over the next 3 to 5 years, and some of this perhaps in perpetuity, we're going to see a number of really exciting programming at our university and at our department in particular as part of these grants. A lot of funded opportunities for our graduate students, from internships to travel to work experience. This is all stuff that is going to funnel specifically to our history department and our public history students. There's going to be a lot of funded opportunities in this way. To work closely with our community partners. I'll give you some examples in just a minute. One of them is the historic Hampton House, as Dr. Jones noted, and Dr. Otovo. There'll be scholars in residence, there'll be artists in residence, people who are doing work on Miami. Particularly, we are building a new robust program. We won an NEH grant, a National Endowment for the Humanities, to build a Miami Studies program that's going to ask big questions like, what does it mean to talk about climate crisis, mass incarceration of Black and Brown folks, detention, all these kinds of key questions, and that Miami happens to be right at the center of so many of these questions. And yet there's been very little effort on part of national politics to understand and take seriously Miami as a city. Here in our department, we're saying that's not okay, that we need to fully understand and create new opportunities to make sure that we address these key questions of our time. And history, of course, is one of the key ways of doing this, that understanding our past is a key way of doing this. Over the span of these 3 to 5 years, we'll create something close to 8 new exhibitions as part of this work, a lot on climate crisis, environmental history, produce 4 new documentaries as part of these grant projects. Something close to about 40 internships will be funded over the span of years. This is an incredible, incredible time. I can talk about this stuff forever. And again, I would encourage you not to let me, so I won't. But let me just tell you 8 of the community partners that we will be working very closely with over the next few years. The San La Haitian Neighborhood Center in Little Haiti, the historic Hampton House, the Museum of Graffiti, the African American Research Library and Cultural Center in Broward County, the Jewish Museum of Florida, Vizcaya Museum and Gardens, the World AIDS Museum, and the Stonewall National Museum and Archives. There are dozens of others that we work with on a regular basis that you can also have an opportunity to intern at and work very closely with. Oftentimes this turns into long-term career goals. It provides you with skills that certainly move beyond your time at the university. That is, we think very deeply about what the market looks like today and how to best prepare you for that world. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A, but for now, I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Dr. Capo. I'm going to interject really quickly and then turn it over to Johnny. Dr. Adler reminded me that I didn't really emphasize the areas of depth in our department. I want to do that really quickly. I didn't introduce myself, by the way. I'm Okezia Otovo, a professor in the department, also the director of the graduate program. My own field of research is Brazilian history. I'm one of a few Latin Americanists, both colonial and modern, in our department. So certainly Latin America is an important field for our history department. But beyond kind of just geographic fields, let me state very briefly, and Dr. Adler mentioned this, we have depth in history of medicine, as Dr. Jones mentioned, and also Dr. Capo, in women's history, gender and sexuality, in race, identity and empire, legal history, and Miami studies. And so those are fields that kind of came to me off the top of my mind, reviewing my colleagues as we were speaking. And so I think that if you're interested in any of those fields, and there are a few others, but those are the ones I think where we have really a concentration of faculty who work, then FIU might be a good place for you. As I said, I'm a historian of modern Brazil. I study race and gender, and particularly the social history of medicine. I'm interested in maternal and child health and welfare in Brazil. I wrote a book called Progressive Mothers, Better Babies about the transition from abolition to freedom in Brazil's Northeast and what that looked like in terms of healthcare for women and their infants. I'm also interested in a project on Miami currently that I'm working with in conjunction with another colleague of ours, Dr. Alex Cornelius, who is the director of the Center for Women's and Gender Studies. So we're looking at Black maternal health in South Florida. I don't want to say too much more there. I want to turn it over to Johnny, but I'll be happy. I'm going to let Johnny talk to us about the student experience, about our great Dogs Association, and then we'll stay a few extra minutes for Q&A. Thank you. Johnny?
Hi, Dr. Otovo. Hi, everyone. It's really great to see you all. My name is Johnny Irizarry. I'm a second-year PhD student, and this year I'm serving as a president for the Department of History Graduate Student Association, also known as DOXA. The purpose of DOXA is to complement academic programs by enhancing students' educational experience by developing exposure and participation in academic, professional, and social activities. Among these, we have our regular meetings, lectures, and workshops. We are committed to fostering scholarly discourse through events, particularly our yearly conference. DOXA hosts an annual graduate conference, which we're currently preparing to provide upcoming researchers an opportunity to present their work to an academic audience. DOXA is committed to aiding the Department of History and FIU in general by improving the quality of academic life and advancing its graduate program reputation. Aside from all the professional and academic strengths, this department has a very supportive faculty, and I can testify to that. Not only they will provide valuable feedback, like Dr. Adler mentioned before, but they will push each student to excel by encouraging them to publish and attend different professional events. It was under the guidance and encouragement, particularly Dr. Adler's and Dr. Capo's encouragement, that I submitted my first opinion piece to local newspaper. And I speak for all the students when I say that we are extremely grateful for their support, especially during this pandemic situation. Uh, I just noticed the new webpage, which is really nice. So you may visit our new FIU webpage to see more and know more about us. And I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you so much, Johnny. So obviously, as you can tell by my enthusiasm, DOGSA is a huge part of the life, the intellectual and social life of the department, and really is to be credited for much of what we're able to do, both in terms of sharing our research as faculty and as students, and for just the general kind of goodwill and welcoming and environment that we hope to provide. So I always say that DOGSA is both an intellectual and a kind of community building part of force in our department. So with that, I want to turn it over to anyone who's in the Zoom who has questions that we can answer about the department, about the degrees. We try to kind of keep it more general than into the weeds of the credits and other things, but I'm happy to talk about anything that you have questions about, whether you've applied or are applying. I know many of you that we've conversed via email. I know you have applied, but if you're thinking about it or if you've done it, happy to answer questions. Iris, would you like to jump in there?
I'm sorry, I'll be really quick. Good morning. My name is Iris Kalaya. Thank you so much for doing this. This is fascinating. I actually have a ton of questions, but I'm not going to ask them. I'll save them to email. But my biggest question, I guess, is I'm particularly interested as a former journalist in the public history component. And so I wasn't clear how that worked and how, when you're reviewing these applications, how you decide who's going into that program or not, what the process for that. And then when you find out if you're hopefully accepted, fingers crossed, is that part of it? Do you find out then if you've been accepted into that program? I just didn't understand the structure of that and how that's set up.
Sure. Well, that's actually a pretty easy question. So when you apply to the MA, you apply to the MA in history kind of comprehensively, right? And then students are able to self-select if they would like to pursue the public history option or to pursue the research report option. So really, it's not so much that students are chosen at the moment of application for either program. We encourage students, if you're accepted into the MA in history and you know public history is what you want to pursue from the beginning, go for it. But students are also welcome to take a few classes and then decide which of the two programs best match their interests and career aspirations. So my answer to that would be it's really self-selection based on what your goals are as you enter the program, your long-term goals.
Okay, so then just quickly as a follow-up too, because I wasn't aware of the fully online option. I didn't know if that's something new that had been added, but I hadn't seen it before, which is amazing, especially for the mother. I'm the mother of 2 young children, and so it's just having that extra flexibility would be nice. Do you choose to just, you would do fully online, or do you have the option to do sort of a hybrid model where you could take some classes online and some classes in person?
I would say if you're interested in a hybrid model where you do some classes in person and some classes online, or if you're interested in public history, right, then you should apply to the MA on campus because that gives you the flexibility to do either. The fully online option is literally that, right? Fully online is every class in the degree is an online class, right? And FIU, and I assume that this is across the state, fully online degrees differ, right, from the on-campus degrees by that delivery method. Fully online is 100% of the degree is through online courses, right? But our on-campus students take any mix that they choose. As of right now, Dr. Capo and I may be able to talk about this a little bit more in the coming year or two, but as of right now, we don't have the option to do public history online because of the internship component and also the core classes. And there's some things that we need to work out logistically for public history to be offered fully online. So right now, fully online is the research option. So if you're interested in either public history or a mix, then I would recommend just applying to the MA, the on-campus MA,
Got it.
which I
Thank you.
think you have.
Yes, I did. It's
Great.
application's already submitted. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll be quiet now, I promise.
But come back if there's another round of questions, Iris. Is there anyone else? I'm sorry, I'm not seeing everyone.
Hi, everyone. I was just wondering, with the ongoing pandemic, has the COVID-19 in some way impacted your research, and how? And also going forward, the next couple of months, I'm in Germany and we've been in complete lockdown since November. So are there any plans to adapt to this whole situation?
Dr. Otovo, do you want some of us to chime in? Okay, well, nice to meet you. Do you say Melina?
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks for the question. I think each of us has been professionally impacted by COVID-19, whether we are historians or something else. As you probably know, we do research in archives, and most archives are closed right now. And so, personally, the faculty members, I, like Dr. Capot, am working on a chapter that was going to involve materials from an archive I was going to visit in May of 2020. And now that chapter is being adapted to have a different focus that can be, that I can concoct the chapter based on archival documents I had before. And so, yes, we are adapting in those sorts of ways. More specifically, in terms of graduate students, they are also having to adapt in terms of their research for this moment. And so right now I'm teaching the graduate 2-semester research seminar, where students in the fall semester do readings in a certain area. The class is called Prisons, Punishment, and Power. So we did all sorts of readings in the fall about prisons and punishment in the US. And then in the spring, the students develop their 25-page research paper that some will use as their master's thesis. So we are using mainly digital archives and digital sources for that. This is a good opportunity to talk about FIU libraries and all of the resources that they offer. As just like many universities, FIU libraries, the libraries at FIU work really hard to create all sorts of to buy access to all sorts of databases and an increasing variety of resources that are out there that are digital, that our students can access. And so in the graduate classes this year, and I don't know if others want to speak to this as well, maybe Johnny or Dr. Capot and Dr. Jones, who are teaching research seminars, but we're sort of forced into the digital environment for now. I will say that I have conducted some oral history interviews by Zoom. And so there's some innovation that I've been forced to make, and that students have been forced to make in terms of digital environments, that actually, for me, I have learned that Zoom transcripts are actually quite accurate. And now, a transcript that would have taken a student transcriber 2 months to produce now can probably be produced in 3 weeks, because they have the Zoom one to work off of. So that's just an example of how the digital environment can produce some innovation and some time-saving techniques, but it's definitely a challenge. For me, looking forward, our professional organizations are sort of trying to tackle this problem as it comes, and sort of planning annual meetings in person and digital and hybrid. And I think that, like you in Germany, everything is kind of up in the air, and everybody's hoping for a quick vaccine rollout and perhaps to have things relatively back to in person in fall, but none of us know. And we just, we can't predict. I just got some money to go to the National Library of Medicine, and it's sort of up in the air as to when that might open. But the grant is still there to get. It's just that the libraries and the facilities are adapting as we go, and everyone's just kind of being open-minded and very accommodating to everybody else. And I guess it's about adaptability now, but hoping for a better future soon. I don't know if others want to add to that.
If I can just briefly add, oh, Hillary, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go.
No, you go.
No, all right, very briefly, I'm just going to add two very brief examples to Dr. Adler's comments, because I have to say, I think part of it has just been creative thinking. Like, that is, we are all working really hard to think differently about the way we do research, the way we do our teaching, and I have to, it's been really generative. I mean that very honest, as a public historian, but also as a historian, point blank, it's been really good. I love Dr. Adler's example about the Zoom transcripts. It's been really, really good for us to think differently about the way we do some of our work. In my teaching, for example, when I taught public history as a grad seminar last semester, one of the things that I ordinarily do anyway, but I thought differently about it under this time, knowing that I was going to be teaching remotely in the fall, was I worked really closely with the library to make sure that all of the resources that were available to our students were available to them for free, right, through our library. So no one was buying books. All of them were available as ebooks or as free articles. We thought really long and hard about how this is affecting us in a lot of really important ways, whether that be in our time management, whether that be financially, but that this has a massive effect on us as human beings, and that we are really mindful of those things. And the second example I'll give in terms of my research and all these changes was I wasn't expecting to curate a new exhibition on HIV/AIDS around the world. And then suddenly, right, I was like, I happen to have this specialty. I happen to know that these materials are available at this museum. What other pandemic can help inform this moment of this coronavirus pandemic? And I thought differently about this material at the Wilsonian, and am now co-curating with one of my friends, Shoshana Resnikoff, a history of HIV/AIDS global posters, using that material. But really, it only came across, right, because there was a pressing need to think differently about the history of pandemics, right? So that is, it is kind of creative thinking and kind of, using the materials that we have available to us in I think, generative ways.
So I'll just jump in here and add, it is affecting all of us in different kinds of ways. And some of us do research where we can't reproduce it, from our living rooms, because it involves a lot of intercultural work on the ground. But, that being said, I was in West Africa and had to evacuate overnight on a research fellowship, on a Fulbright fellowship. So it's impacted my research in that way. But I would also just mention this. We were talking about online teaching a moment ago, and FIU and FIU's history department was innovating in online teaching before COVID-19. So we were already developing online degree programs. The history department online degree, the history online degree was ready to roll out when all of this happened. So I just want to say that, because I'm teaching a course for graduate students that I would have taught anyway as a fully online course. And a lot of the coursework that you're going to do is readings coursework before you get into the research. And in readings classes, like Dr. Capot mentioned, I've made good effort to make sure that students can get the materials fairly easily, but then also to make use of the kinds of online resources that are available. And, and I've been able to figure out methods of using online tools that are available to deliver that content in a way that gives us, it's not face-to-face, but we have interaction with it. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I also think FIU is not our history department hasn't just started to figure out how to teach online.
I saw another hand, and I don't know if that was maybe Maddie. Someone had the little.
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, please.
I just wanted to talk more about the flexibility of the master's program, because I really want to, I'm about to finish my undergraduate degree now by the end of summer. And I really want to get my teaching certification after I'm done. But I'm sort of conflicted about which master's program I should apply to, because on one hand, the fully online one probably does offer me the most flexibility. But on the other hand, I really do I really do think that history is best taught when there's a discussion based element to it. So I was just curious about how flexible the classes are, like what times, generally like most classes in the department are, what you think about that. Because I know a lot of students at FIU have full-time jobs and,
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So in terms of the on-campus program, typically our classes start in the evenings. They're 5 to 7:40 p.m. That's the typical block for all graduate seminars and research classes in the history department. Occasionally we might have an afternoon class, but for the most part, this has been many years, right? Our classes are evening classes for that very reason that you mentioned, that many students have full-time jobs. So typically we're in the 5 to 7:40 p.m. Block. So that's kind of one consideration if your time is constricted or if you're working. But I do just want to reiterate something that Dr. Jones just said, which is really important, and that we all know, and if there's anyone in the Zoom call who's a school teacher, you'd say this as well, that the difficulty of the transition at many places when we all went remote, right? When we had to, within a week or so, move from the face-to-face model to either using Zoom or fully online. In history, though, we already had a fully online BA and a fully online MA prepared, right? I don't think as of the spring we hadn't had our first student. We had our first student this fall. So we had those programs ready to go, and all the fully online BA already underway. And why that matters is that we weren't in a crisis situation when we developed the curriculum for this type of delivery method, right? We developed them with a lot of thought in mind on how to replicate things like what you're mentioning, right? The interactive, the discussion format, the importance of sharing ideas in the graduate program from an in-person classroom to an online environment, right? So that's, that was a process that we went through over a good length of time, and has allowed us then now to have graduate courses that do successfully, or I think successfully, I'll be honest, I don't think they're equivalent, right? I wouldn't say that online and face-to-face is exactly equivalent, but I definitely think it's possible to have a rich, satisfactory, engaging and productive discussion-based course in the online environment. It is possible to do that. And so I think you'll find, I'm teaching an online course right now, Historical Methods, and we have discussion actually starting today. I think you'll find, particularly with faculty who have experience in graduate courses fully online, that you do get that same exchange of ideas in the online format. So I would say, part of this comes down to both your schedule and your preference for how you think you best learn and interact. But I just want to clarify that the fully online courses don't mean fully text, right? You still have that possibility of interaction, both with the professor and with your colleagues in the course. Thank you for that.
Yeah. I have Dr. Jones for an undergraduate class meeting later, and she's really good, like a remote lecturer. So I mean, I wasn't too worried about that, but I just didn't know about the times and stuff.
Yeah. And in general, our online, our in-person classes, our on-campus classes are scheduled for people who work during the day. So we start at 5 p.m.
Thank you.
Sure. Simon, please.
I have a question. Thank you. I am a high school teacher now. I've been teaching for about 11, 12 years. I've had my master's for about 15 years. I wasn't really too serious about going to get my PhD, but lately I took some courses just because I had the downtime from the COVID and being out of the classroom, and it would help me with my professional development. And then I kind of felt like I still had it in me to go back to school. So I'm kind of curious about the PhD program, but I live up in Boynton Beach. And although you do have most of your graduate classes scheduled in the evenings, it would still be quite a hike, on a regular basis. So I was wondering, out of the, I guess 75, I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm wondering, out of the 75 credits or so, about how many at the PhD level you could take online or remotely, or is it all on campus? Would I have to trek down there for every single class, or is it kind of a hybrid model?
To be honest, our PhD program is an on-campus program, right? So I always clarify this, that the PhD doesn't have the fully online option, as does the MA. We do offer some online courses that PhD students can take, particularly in the summers, but you couldn't do the full curriculum fully online, unfortunately. So what I would suggest, particularly if you are still kind of on the fence about doing a PhD, come down and take a couple of evening classes, or even one, right? Evening class when we're back on campus in the fall, and see, both how the classroom experience is for you, as well as how it matches with your professional schedule and having to drive down, right? So there's always the option at FIU to take up to 4 courses as a non-degree student. Maybe that's what you've done, right? Without fully committing to a degree, but you've taken 2. So yeah, come down and take a class on campus and see what that experience is like, so that you both, get the academic preparation of taking the course, but also the kind of real world experience of making that drive and see how it feels to you. I have to say, I have a student now who lives in Sarasota.
Mm-hmm.
Because graduate classes tend to meet only once per week, she'll make it down, take the class and head back. So it is possible for people to make the drive and different, obviously, from the undergraduate level, the classes will only meet once a week. So if you're taking, let's say, 2 classes and 1 online, maybe twice a week, you would need to drive down. But the PhD is on campus program. But I'd say test it out and see.
And obviously, if you're juggling it with your career, you may not be a full-time student. How long would you have to finish the program?
Technically, at FIU, you have to complete a PhD program within 9 years.
Okay.
Within 9 years.
More than enough of time. Okay.
Yeah. Now, as you have a master's degree in history, right, you will have already taken 30 of the 60. You can apply up to 30 credits transferred from a master's degree into the PhD, leaving 30 credits of coursework, right? So being really careful, this is 30 credits of coursework, right? The PhD is different from the MA, and that coursework is only, I tell students, coursework is just a foundation. Coursework isn't really the tree that you're growing when you produce a PhD. So there are about 30 credits for those who have an MA of coursework, and then you have a period of independent study, okay, which is basically when you're transitioning from the coursework stage to researching a dissertation, in which you will take 2 foreign language exams, prepare and take comprehensive exams in 3 fields, as well as produce a dissertation proposal. So the period in between when you finish courses and when you start a dissertation is usually a year, if not more than a year, right? And then the dissertation process itself is probably 2 to 3 years, right? So, so the coursework part can be done rather efficiently time-wise, but again, that's just the basis by which you kind of construct what is the PhD. Yeah. But we are a 12-month program. I should clarify. We are a 12-month program. So PhD students are enrolled year-round, meaning that during the summers, you can also take 2 courses.
Right. That's very helpful.
Mhm.
And to know that you have somebody enrolled from Sarasota is promising.
Yeah. I don't know
Okay.
how she does it, but she does it. She does it.
Is your teacher?
No.
No, okay. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else okay, Andreas.
Hi, how are you? I came in a little late into the meeting due to work, but I wanted to ask. My case is a little bit different. I want to go into the master's in history. Originally I did an FIU. I did my international business, bachelor's. But over the years, I just realized that I realized that wasn't my calling, and I'm more intended to be a professor in history. So from what I've read online is that I would have to do some undergraduate classes in order to end up inside the master's in history. So I would like to, can you give me a little bit explanation what I should do? What should be my next step?
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of options here. If you've never taken any upper division history classes at the undergraduate level, we either ask you to take some upper division history classes at the undergraduate level before, so that's what you would have read online. Or what I suggest these days, and I think it's more important, is what I was saying to Simon. I think it's actually a better idea to take 2 or more non-degree graduate courses before applying to the MA. Right? So sort of what's more important, I think, is a better gauge of both your interest and preparedness to go into graduate study. It's actually to go into the graduate classroom. So what I really suggest to students who are trying to transition one discipline to the next, from international business to history, just apply and do some non-degree classes. This summer, Dr. Jones is going to have a class that's fully online. We should have another one, perhaps. I think we'll have 2. I think we'll have Dr. Jones, and I think we'll have Dr. Lee Portito teaching urban history. So those are a couple of fully online graduate courses that you can take during the summer. And then obviously we'll have our full roster of classes in the fall. But what I would suggest is just take at least 2. There's a maximum of 4 that you can take, as I was mentioning to Simon. And if you later apply to and are accepted into the MA, they transfer in, right? So any graduate course you take as a non-degree student in history will become part of your MA in history. So that would be my advice to you. The undergraduate courses can be great, and you'll find lots of interesting topics, but I think probably the better correspondence is to take a graduate class or take a couple of graduate classes as a non-degree student. And that process, you have to apply to be a non-degree student. That process is managed by the registrar's office. So you just want to go to onestop.fiu.edu or just go on our website and Google non-degree seeking student, and you'll find a brief application there, and we welcome non-degree students in history. So it's not a problem.
Okay. And so take 2 over the summer, and after taking those,
it's your choice, the timeline, but we will have 2 offered over the summer.
You would have 2 offered
so you can start. My point is that you could start right away. Can
you apply FAFSA towards those?
Sorry?
Can you apply FAFSA towards those?
That's a question I'm going to refer to the One Stop office as well.
Okay.
But I believe that financial aid cannot be applied to graduate classes, but don't listen to me on that. Please ask that question to, yes, Nanette is saying in the chat,
yeah,
unfortunately, no. Yeah, unfortunately, I do not believe so.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
Anyone else we can help before we wrap up?
If I'm not seeing any other questions, I do want to be mindful and wrap it up. We've gone over time, but it's just been so informative. I know I've learned so much, and I'm so appreciative of everyone's time here and commitment. This has been amazing. I know, like I said, I've learned so much, and I think it's great and amazing how you all brought an amazing panel here to go ahead and speak of their interests and their work, and it's been very informative. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Just some last housekeeping things or wrap up tips, I guess you could say. If you are interested in more of our sessions, our general sessions, Lynette already put it in the chat. She knows what I'm going to say. Please visit go.fiu.edu/visit. We have our general sessions there, so please make sure to go ahead and check us out. We also have an Instagram. I run our Instagram where I always like to put tips and tricks and everything and whatnot, so please make sure to follow. It's FIU Grad Shira on Instagram. And please make sure as well to follow all of the Histories social media outlets or check out their websites. They're very informative. Last thing to mention as well, we do have our upcoming graduate fair on February 4th. History will be there. There's also going to be a bunch of other sessions and a graduate student panel. So please make sure to join us then. Hopefully you all will be receiving an email, so on and so forth with more information, but please make sure to join us then. Good luck everyone, stay safe, and thank you for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank you all
you.
attending. Thank you to Shira and the team.